All right, let's just jump right into it. Today, we're unpacking a historical counter-narrative that pretty much challenges everything we've been taught in standard history classes. We're looking at a deeply debated, really groundbreaking thesis from historian Pierre Rossi and his book, The True History of the Arabs. Now, no matter where you personally stand on historical timelines, we're going to impartially map out this cinematic counter-narrative. We are absolutely not here to take sides today. We're just here to explore a totally different lens on the ancient world. So grab your notebooks, get focused, and let's dive into the source material.
To kick things off, we've got to ask the big, fundamental question that triggered this whole thesis. Did Arab history really just begin a few centuries before Islam? I mean, if you open up most classic Western history textbooks, the timeline you get for the emergence of Arab identity is, well, it's pretty late in the grand scheme of human civilization. But is there a massive chapter of this story missing from our textbooks? According to Rossi, there absolutely is, and it completely reshapes how we view the ancient world.
Let's look at the foundation of the traditional narrative first, what the source material actually calls the standard illusion. So in this classic Western view, Arab history just kind of suddenly pops into existence around 500 AD. It paints this picture of a people who were mostly isolated nomads, right? Wandering the harsh deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, totally cut off from the great ancient civilizations of the world. It's basically a story of isolation and sudden emergence. We're all pretty familiar with this baseline narrative, but Rossi's work asks us to pause and really question the validity of that sudden historical start.
Now get ready for a bit of a cognitive shock. Because instead of a restricted, isolated desert peninsula, Rossi's thesis argues that the true roots of Arab identity actually stretch across the entire ancient East, literally from the Levant, down through the peninsula, and all the way across Mesopotamia. And here's the kicker. He asserts these roots don't start in 500 AD, but actually reach back thousands and thousands of years BC. He argues these early peoples weren't just isolated latecomers, they were active, foundational partners in building the very first civilizations of the ancient East.
So, the contrast here is honestly stark. On one hand, you've got the classical Western view, confined geography, a post-500 AD timeline, and a role basically limited to transient nomads. But on the flip side, Rossi's thesis gives us this massive geographic footprint covering the whole Fertile Crescent, a timeline reaching deep into the millennia DC, and positions them as the original engineers and builders of civilization. The main takeaway here is that Rossi is completely redefining the time, the place, and the role of this identity in global history.
Now, to really wrap our heads around this massive claim, we have to look at geography in a totally different way. Think geography without borders. Today, obviously, we see these rigid lines dividing the Levant, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Arabian Peninsula, but in the ancient world, those simply didn't exist. According to the source, this vast region acted as a single, unified stage. It was this massive, free-flowing network for ideas, commerce, and early human ancestry. The geography didn't separate these ancient peoples, it actually connected them in one vibrant cultural ecosystem.
And the demographic result of all that connected geography, it's what Rossi describes as a massive, forgotten ancestral family tree. Instead of looking at the ancient East as this series of totally disconnected civilizations that just randomly rose and fell in isolation, this thesis proposes something radically different. The argument is that the various ancient populations we read about were actually just different regional names, different expressions of a single continuous cultural and ancestral essence. Basically, they were all part of the same massive family tree, growing out of the exact same soil.
Let's get specific about those roots. The source material lists these key civilizational branches: the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and the Canaanites. Traditionally, we're taught that these are entirely distinct, separate entities. But Rossi makes the provocative claim that these groups actually represent the deep, ancient roots of Arab identity. He argues they weren't entirely different peoples at all, but rather earlier iterations, different branches of the same continuous cultural evolution in the East. It's a truly fascinating way to re-examine the lineage of human history, proposing this unbroken chain instead of a bunch of fragmented empires. But how do you actually prove a continuous chain that spans thousands of years? Well, through the engineering of language. The thesis argues that the Arabic language didn't just magically appear out of thin air in the desert. Far from it. It was systematically engineered. It's the legitimate heir to thousands of years of linguistic evolution in the ancient East. Think of language like fossilized thought. Rossi claims that by tracing the evolution of the script, we're essentially tracing the DNA of this continuous civilization.
Let's actually follow that linguistic evolution. It starts with cuneiform, that ancient wedge-shaped script of Mesopotamia. Then it evolves into Aramaic, which basically became the lingua franca of the whole region. From there, it bridges through the Nabatean script. And finally, it arrives at early Arabic. Rossi uses this evidence to show that every single script was a stepping stone. It points to a deep, systematic progression within the Eastern world, proving that the culture was constantly evolving, adapting, and refining how it communicated over millennia.
And this brings us to a huge paradigm shift in the book. These ancestors were builders of civilization, not just nomads. We kind of have to forget that stereotypical image of a lone tent in the desert. The reality, according to Rossi, was magnificent ziggurats and towering walled cities. His book forcefully argues that these ancestors were master architects, engineers, and agricultural innovators. I mean, they figured out how to tame rivers, organize complex societies, and build the first great metropolises, way before shifting climates or politics forced some of them into a nomadic lifestyle. The city, not just the desert, is their original legacy.
And because they built these incredible centers of civilization, the ancient East basically acted as the beating heart of the ancient world. It was like this giant interconnected mechanism. This region controlled the vital trade lines, pulling resources into the East while simultaneously pushing philosophy, science, and engineering out to the West. Long before the rise of Athens or Rome, this interconnected Eastern world was the engine driving human progress. It literally set the rhythm for the entire ancient world.
So, if the East was the beating heart, why on earth don't our standard textbooks reflect that? Well, the source argues a pretty provocative climax here. History was hijacked by Eurocentrism. Basically, a new historical lens was forced onto the timeline, which effectively severed the continuous flow of Eastern achievements. The book claims this Eurocentric view deliberately rewrote the narrative to make it look like civilization originated almost exclusively in Greece and Rome. By changing the names and dividing the geography, the West absorbed the achievements of the East, cutting off this continuous identity from its own profound historical legacy.
When we pull all these pillars together, the core of Rossi's argument becomes crystal clear. According to this counter-narrative, the deep Arab identity is forged by the intersection of three main things: connected geography, linguistic continuity, and architectural mastery. They aren't some late anomaly that just popped out of nowhere. They're the natural, uninterrupted continuation of the very first civilizations in the region. When you lock those three elements together, the whole myth of the isolated nomad kind of dissolves, and it's replaced by this complex, deeply rooted historical presence.
Which brings us to the ultimate conclusion of Pierre Rossi's groundbreaking work. History does not start in the desert, but at the dawn of human civilization. It is a massive paradigm shift. It really challenges us to look past just the recent centuries and our standard curriculums, and to recognize a timeline of continuous human achievement that spans practically the entirety of recorded history in the ancient East.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Does this change how you view the origins of human history? Whether you totally agree with Rossi's thesis or you remain super skeptical, you can't deny that digging into these counter-narratives makes us sharper, more focused learners. It forces us to ask why we're taught what we're taught. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. If you enjoyed unpacking this complex topic, make sure to hit subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for more fascinating deep dives right here on the channel. Keep questioning and keep learning.